Thank you. You may have noticed coming in that it's a pretty active evening here on Monday night at Castleview High School. So earlier today we had a softball game. We've got volleyball from the middle school being hosted downstairs. We've got the math group out doing their projects, and hopefully you got a chance to see that. So parking was limited. I know people are going to straggle in late because of that. I apologize, sorta. I'm very, very happy at this school that we've got a lot going on. It speaks volumes for what our kids are doing and what they're involved in. If you've got small kids with you, and I don't see a whole lot in the building, but there are, or in the room, there is an activity outside for them. And if they get a little restless, they're doing some arts and crafts out there. Just thought I'd mention that. Somebody told me that they've got that planned for this evening. So I want to welcome you. This is the first of a series of conversations about educating the modern learner. We begin this whole process with a lot of thinking that's gone on for a while, but today we began the first of a two-day symposium, and these guests that are on stage that will introduce themselves in a little bit are part of that symposium. 9 years ago, Dr. Lyle Gates was the founding principal of this high school, and he based the fundamental foundational elements of this school on the reform agenda of a decade ago. And today we continue to discuss what that reform looks like. What kind of changes do we need to have at Castleview High School? Not just in public education, but what we need to do right here. So we continue to discuss and debate and what's important. What changes should we make? We had interesting and riveting discussions this morning with the panelists that are on stage. We want to create a transformational learning environment, and that's not an easy task. And so we've got help. The help is sitting to my left here. And again, we're spending 2 days using these experts to help guide us on our path towards change. Again, these guests will introduce themselves shortly, but I'm going to do a little bit more in the way of an introduction and a little quick activity to get us started this evening. Again, the purpose for tonight is to begin the discussion regarding education and what the future holds. We want you to be part of that dialogue as parents of students at this high school, or maybe future parents of future students at this high school, in case of those parents that are here from maybe the middle school or elementary schools. I want to use an analogy that one of our guests used this morning as we were talking about getting ready for this and this event tonight. It's like we're in a company that's going to release a movie. And we're going to release that movie in the fall of 2014. Now, we just don't throw the film out there and make it. There's lots of stages to that. There's a pre-production stage. And then you produce the movie, you film it. And then there's that post-production stage where you go through and make last-minute changes to it. And then you have the release of that movie, which will be in the fall. And right now, we're in that pre-production stage. Part of the two-day symposium is part of the pre-production stage. This information that you're going to get this evening is pre-production. Kind of like casting or scripting or finding financial resources. Doug, I hope that's what pre-production is, what you're doing at your school. So pre-production, so listening to our guest, gathering information, setting the groundwork for establishing partnerships with members of the community, with our parents, with our students. That's what this pre-production part is about. That's our goal. We will have further conversations about exact specifics and nuts and bolts, but this is not a nuts and bolts night. We're going to invite you to come back and attend those nuts and bolts meetings so that we can have dialogue about that. Some of you may get involved with that dialogue. In fact, at the symposium, we have 2 parents and 2 students attending, and tomorrow we'll have some more parents and some more students attending the symposium. So this will be a process. The pre-production will last for a while, and then we'll get into the production phase. Over the summer, we'll do the post-production, and then we'll release the movie in the fall of 2014 with a group of incoming 9th graders. So that'll be 8th graders this year. So I hope you were able to come in this evening, and raise your hand if you did get to see our math presentations. Raise your hand if you got a chance to go down the hall. So I'm looking out, and I'm seeing about half the hands up. I'm going to bring Rob Hazelhurst to the podium now, and he's going to introduce some students that are in the engineering class. They're going to do a demonstration for you. So without further ado, I'm going to let Rob continue this little activity, this little introduction to our night. Rob.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Rob Hazelhurst, and I teach the engineering classes here at Castleview High School. Tonight, as we discuss modern learning, we wanted to share an example of a project where students are applying their problem-solving skills to develop a solution for a real problem. With me on the stage, I have Hunter Linder, I have Zach Moss, and I have Matt Pichon, and they're going to be speaking to you in a minute. They are working together on a project that we call Rhesus Robot. Instead of a traditional classroom setting, these students are working on a project with mentoring from me, but they're doing it by themselves pretty much. They also are getting a lot of mentoring from an industry partner, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Branson from a company called Spark Fun up in Boulder, Colorado. So this is a true joint project between education and industry. What got this all going was last spring, I was approached by Sarah Reed, who I believe is here tonight. Sarah is a special education teacher, and she approached me and said, "Hey, Castleview Engineering, I hear you guys do robots. And I was wondering if you guys could build a robot for a student who's homebound so that that student can go to school remotely." And I tell you, this request, when I heard it, was a bit scary. Part of the reason it was scary was, as my friend Jeff Branson put it in a recent conversation, he said, "You know, this is a lot like building a Mars rover. About the only difference is this robot's not on Mars." And it's right. This is a project that represents some significant challenges to develop this. Luckily, I had some talented students waiting in the wings, these three guys, and we were able to join up with our industry partner, as I mentioned. And so with those resources and that support, I decided we'd go ahead and say yes to that request. So we started that project. Our client is a young man named Rhesus Robot. He's somewhat known in this community. Several people have done fundraisers for Rhesus through what's called Rhesus Roundup. He's a second grader at a local elementary school. When he was a little guy, about 3 months old, he was diagnosed with type 1 spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA. And he is homebound. Since he can't attend school in person, our team is in the process of building him what we're calling Rhesus Robot to allow him to attend school remotely. At this point, I'm going to let Hunter, Zach, and Matt share the work they're doing on this project and what they've been learning along the way.
So getting to know Rhesus. We met Rhesus to learn his needs and his obstacles that he overcomes daily through the way he communicates and acts with his computer and technology at home.
We also learned how capable Rhesus is given the correct controls, which was quite amazing considering when we played video games with him, he kicked our butts in every single one.
And so what we've done for the project so far is we've developed a little prototype robot that we've got up on stage using commercial off-the-shelf software and hardware, specifically an Arduino board, which is a little microcontroller that lets us do all the stuff we're trying to do in a really easy and elegant manner.
So far, we've learned how to control the robot by our smartphones using Bluetooth messaging to and from it. We've also learned how to use our computer to send radio waves to and from the robot. And our ultimate goal across it is to use Wi-Fi to connect it to the internet.
Because of Rhesus's limited mobility, we've had to design and develop prototype controls that he can use to control the robot. One of them being this joystick we designed in SolidWorks, which is an AutoCAD program. And because that we have a 3D printer at our school, we're able to print it out and prototype it right here on the spot. We've also developed pillow buttons, which, as you can see there, in a picture on the next slide actually, which Rhesus can actually put his hands on the pillars themselves and control the robot that way.
So if you would go ahead and demonstrate. So right now what he's doing is he's just touching the pillows, which have a bit of conductive material attached to them and grounding wire. And basically the little device we've got attached to it allows us to do rapid prototyping for a controller using almost anything, even bananas.
Go ahead. So what does this have to do with modern learning? Well, it's a real project. It's benefiting our community, and it's not some fake cookie cutter project that teachers just give to you to pull a grade from you.
Because this is a real project, we have student choice and we have all the power we could ever have in this whole project. We really have the say of what we want with this, and it gives us a certain ownership you don't get with other projects. And what this also means, you got less teacher and far more student than you can ever have with any other way of learning.
And so far, we've actually had a ton of support for the project that we're doing. Like Mr. Hazelhurst said, we've had a lot of support from SparkFun Electronics and Jeff Branson, who's with SparkFun. And actually, just the other day, we had a guy who had heard about our project and was really excited about it come up to us and offer to actually donate batteries to us for our final robot because he was so interested and excited about what we're doing as high schoolers.
It's kind of that heartwarming feeling that people get when we talk to teachers and mentors and stakeholders that they want to help us on our way to finish this project for Rhesus and get it working.
And because of this, there's a huge element of risk in that there is no obvious answer or guarantee of success. We design what we want, the controls what we want, and we have all the say. And that risk honestly motivates us that much more to get it done.
I guess what we're trying to get to you is the current system isn't bad. It actually teaches a lot. But the new one they're trying to come up with is better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice finding it, man.
All right, we'll get this slide back up there because it's important for this next part. But I do want you to know I did not pay those guys to say that. In fact, I knew very little of what they were going to say or how they were going to produce it. They sent me the slides in advance, and I've kind of approved that. But what I wanted to do with that, and with the math presentations that are Mr. Justice's Math 3 class, was just give you a taste of things that we're talking about. If we're going to design a future education that prepares students for the future, then we've got to make it appealing to them. We've got to make it relevant. And I think that project that you just saw is very relevant to those three young men, Matt, Zach, and Hunter. You can just tell that they've got an extra level of enthusiasm and passion about what they're doing, because they're building something not just to satisfy a grade requirement, but they're building something for Rhesus. It has a lot of meaning to them. And so congratulations. Are they still in here? Did they leave? Okay, congratulations, guys. Way to go. Let's give them another round of applause, please. And Rob, I want to thank you as well. You do a great job in that engineering department. Really lucky to have you here, so thank you. We're going to do some introductions. Going to do it a little bit different. In fact, suggestion just minutes before we came on stage, I've changed my whole how I was going to do this, but I think it was a good suggestion, so I'm going to run with it. Dr. Zal, thank you for that suggestion, but also help me out if I goof it up along the way. Would you just direct me? But basically, we're going to do some questions for these panel members, but before they do the question, in groups of three, they're going to introduce themselves. And what I want you to know is that there's a group of experts that are here, and they're going to give you just a little bit of information about who they are, what they're doing, and how they're helping us in general. Okay? So I'll get the first three. Carl, you can give a start with your introduction, and we'll do 3 introductions, and then I'll ask a question.
Okay, so my name is Carl Fish. I'm Abby's dad. Abby is 13 years old. She's an 8th grader at Rocky Heights Middle School. On the side, I also teach students algebra at Arapahoe High School, and I'm the director of technology there. But mostly tonight, I'm here, I think, as Abby's dad. We had discussions earlier today, and I had about an hour that I made it home in between before tonight. And Abby came home today and said that she doesn't have PE this week because she's taking the Explorer test. And in the last couple of weeks, she had the opportunity to take the MAP test in reading and writing and math and science, I believe. So she missed some more stuff there. And apparently she's going to get the opportunity to take the MAP test again in the winter and again in the spring over those subject areas. And of course, in the spring, she'll also get to take the TCAP, and being an 8th grader, I believe she also gets to take an extra one this year, science. But this is the last year of the TCAP. Next year, she'll have the opportunity to take the PARC tests, which is in more subject areas and all on computers, which as a technology guy, I'm not necessarily for or against that, except I'm not quite sure how we're going to, you have 1,800 kids here? We're going to test 1,800 kids on computers all at the same time with no funding. But that's another talk. So I guess my contribution to this is I don't want Abby's teachers, when she goes to high school next year, to see her as a bubble kid. And if you're not an educator, a bubble kid is a student who's, say, partially proficient on the TCAP, but maybe 5 points away from the cut score to go to proficient. Or maybe they're proficient and 5 points away from the advanced score. And the way the system is currently set up, it's more important for us as teachers to get those bubble kids moved up 5 points than it is to get a kid at the bottom of the scale up 50 points. I don't really think that's right. I really want them to see Abby. I want them to see this complex, wonderful, complex, did I mention she was 13, learner who's trying to figure out who she is. You know, we can take whatever set of standards you want, whether they're Common Core or GVCs here in Douglas County, whether they're internationally benchmarked or world class or whatever, and I'm not denigrating any of that stuff. But you can take all those things and we can have a laundry list of things that we can satisfy for our kids, or we could have a one-sentence goal, which is something along the lines of, I really want them to help Abby discover her passions, not just discover it, but develop those passions. And it might be more than one because she's 13 and it's going to change, and help her develop into a curious, passionate learner who cares about the people around her and uses her talents that high school helped her develop to give back to her community. That's what I'm looking for in a high school, and so much of our current system doesn't allow some very dedicated and hardworking educators to do that. And I think that the things that Castleview is talking about perhaps is a great opportunity for some of our students.
My name is John Lanning. I'm at the University of Colorado at Denver, where I'm a professor of chemistry, and I'm an assistant vice chancellor. And so I wear a variety of hats in this conversation that we've had today. I'm also the dad of 3 sons who went through Denver public schools. All 3 of them have graduated from college. And for those of you parents out there who are about to have a college student, my message is you will survive. It's not always easy, but you will survive. So in my role at the university, I teach a variety of chemistry classes from undergraduate to graduate in chemistry. But my real role here, I think, is as an administrator, I oversee some programs that are very much of interest to what you're doing and what this conversation is all about. So we have a transition program for students who are coming immediately out of high school to the university. We call it a first-year seminar program. Several colleges and universities have something like this. Ours is all set up so students who can have a good transition. And I related to the group this morning that I didn't have a particularly good transition when I went to college. And so I'm very committed to making sure that the university provides an opportunity in a hand-picked small classroom environment to support students academically, socially, and career-wise. I also oversee a couple of intervention programs. One of those programs started today, and at the 5th week of each semester, we ask each faculty member teaching an undergraduate course if they have any students who need help academically, in terms of participation, or in terms of their behavior in the classroom. And we call it an early alert program. And it's been incredibly successful that if you intervene early in the semester, that you can provide campus resources and support to students so that they don't end up on academic probation or suspension. And so we put a lot of effort into this. The third program that I oversee is a very interesting program. It's in a pilot program, and it's all about attendance. And we basically plagiarized this from Mississippi State. And all we do is ask the faculty to identify students who don't come to class the first 2 weeks. The relationship between college students who don't go to class and who are not successful their first semester, their first year, is very strong. And intervening early just to support students going to class has turned out to be very beneficial. I'd like to think we could move that into a real program, but I'm not quite sure we're going to be able to financially pull that off. So the message I'm here to talk about is the university wants every student who's admitted to be successful. And I think our role, and we're going to talk a little bit more later about the changing role, I think our role is to provide the support for students to do that. And I'm real proud to be here, and I think you've got a bunch of courageous teachers here that are trying to look at what I call a faculty-mentored, inquiry-based program. They call it something slightly different, but that's my take on it. It's faculty-mentored, it's inquiry or research-based, and I think that's very important. So if you boil success at a university down to one word, it would be engagement. This is engagement in spades.
So I'm Tim Kubek, and I'm coming to you from northern Colorado, the parts that are still above water. I'm very thankful to be here. There's one road left into my neighborhood, and I'm very thankful to Jim for the opportunity to be here. Like my two predecessors, I'm the parent of 2 children who are currently in public schools. My youngest, the daughter, I think most of you would be glad to have. She is the model student. She does everything she's asked, exactly as she's asked, and gets disappointed if she does not get a perfect score on everything that she does. And she'll be fine. And then I'm the parent of a son who's 15 who does nothing that he's asked, deliberately does things the opposite of what was asked as a way of proving that he's smarter than his teachers, and is currently pulling a grade point average somewhere in the 1 point something range. And I'm part of this project because I want to convince you that he's going to be fine too, for reasons that may be really hard to fathom. And I've spent my whole life actually preparing for careers that disappeared. In 1998, I graduated Yale University with a degree in Sovietology, with an emphasis on Soviet naval policy. I went to Africa for a while to wait for my security clearance, and while I was there, I learned some very interesting things about teaching that my mother, who was a first-grade teacher, and that all of my professors at Yale never really told me. But they echo what we've heard so far. That engagement matters more than anything else that happens in the classroom, with the possible exception of the relationship that fosters that engagement. That students need meaningful and complex things to work on if they're going to be engaged. And that those meaningful and complex things, like Rhesus Robot, need to have an authentic context where they take place. I can give someone a very meaningful and complex artificial assignment that will not motivate students as these students are motivated to build this robot. So as I had those realizations and was realized by the intelligence community that they no longer needed my services, I decided to become a German historian. And there was a reason for that, because I realized that in Germany in the 19th century, there was a move for something called applied learning. There was a recognized need that the modern learner of the 19th century was a lot like what we think about the modern learner of the 20th century and the 21st century. But this happened before industrialization. This movement in Germany, the applied method movement, was not a result of industrialization. It came before it. And then when industrialization hit, it sort of disappeared, sort of like what happened to John Dewey. Right? Tried it, but there were massive increases in productivity in the 1920s and 30s that suddenly sort of made progressive education seem not right any longer. I think it still is right. I think as we approach a post-industrial age, I think we're realizing that a lot of what we thought about education before we standardized it, before we industrialized it, before we built assembly line schools that cranked out similar candidates to go to any position anywhere in any company, we taught students to do something that one of your students taught us to do today, which is to think about how to set goals, how to achieve those goals, and then most importantly, how to articulate themselves in their own language that they had achieved those goals. And so I taught for 11 years at the high school and university level. And then in 2007, I left teaching to begin writing curriculum and doing consulting. First with the Asia Society International Schools Project. There are 3 ISSN schools here in the Denver area. And then most recently with the Buck Institute for Education based out of San Francisco, which is a project-based learning organization. And when I joined BIE 5 years ago, there were 6 of us. And we did about 12 workshops this summer. This summer there are, I think, 55 of us, and we're doing over 500 workshops this summer across the United States. This move that Castleview High School wants to do is where parts of the country are started to go without the support of parents like you and the larger community, the business partners that are getting behind this. This will be another thing that sort of slides away. So I really want to salute you for being here tonight and spending your evening with us as opposed to the other things you might have been doing. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. So this is question 1, but I just want to reiterate here real quick. We have a practitioner at the high school level, practitioner at the college level, and a past practitioner at the educational level, but now a consultant. So I'm going to ask them a question, and before I do that, I forgot to do something. So up here, back channels, and this is a technology thing. So, if you can get on Twitter or Facebook on your smartphones, you can interact with this conversation that we're having by asking questions and putting that hashtag in there. And I called it a hash brown the other day because I don't know what a hashtag is yet. I am on Twitter, but I haven't figured out the hashtag part. So you guys are going to have to be smarter than me. You've got students up there that can help you get to the hashtag. Parents, send us your questions, and then we'll filter through those questions, and we may use some of those questions in the discussion tonight. But if we don't get to them, we're going to use those discussions later on in our conversations as we progress through this. So for these 3, here's their question. It's really a statement in the form of a question, but can you talk about how realities have changed over the last 20 years?
Well, let's see. I guess I'd start with just personal stuff, which is that 20 years ago, almost exactly, is when I transitioned from being a full-time math teacher to being a full-time technology director at Arapahoe High School. And the main reason I got the job was because when I walked past a Macintosh SE, I wasn't frightened. That was my total background in computers. And for those of you who are old enough, you might remember the Macintosh SE. It shipped with an 8 megahertz processor, a whopping 1 megabyte of RAM, and it came standard with dual 800K floppy drives, all for the low, low price of $2,800. But for $1,000 more, so $3,800, you could get this newfangled thing called a hard drive. It was 20 megabytes, more than you would ever need. You know, flash forward to today, and our kids literally are carrying around more computing power in their pockets than the Apollo astronauts had in their capsule. And in fact, Google posted not too long ago that when you do a single Google search, it activates more technology, more computing power than the Apollo program had in its entire 20-year history, just in that single Google search. So I think one of the things we're looking at as educators is picture what that iPhone in your student's pocket is going to look like and be capable of in 10 years, and then match that up with your vision of school when you grew up. because that's, I think, one of the big problems that many of us have, including myself, is that we have a vision of what school looks like, and that world doesn't exist anymore. And all the affordances that that technology brings us, it allows kids and adults in their lives to do things that they couldn't do before. And I think that's really exciting, but it's also a tad depressing when you look at what we're, in a lot of ways, doing in schools is not that terribly different than when you were in school.
I'm here to slightly confirm that the university maintains a couple of faculty who think that dustless chalk is a recent technological breakthrough. But I'm also here to tell you that the change in higher ed is tremendous. And I'm going to give it to you in 4 areas. The access, a higher percentage of high school graduates are going to higher education, continues to go up. It also means that universities have to provide more support services to make sure those students are successful. Maybe the biggest change is affordability. And I don't think you have to look very far to see a lot of questions about whether a college degree is worth it. And the economic analysis unequivocally says the answer is yes. But there's a lot more to having a college degree than straight economics. And so I'm here to support that college degree, knowing that it's changed tremendously since some of you were in college and a lot since I was in college in terms of what that means. The next is assessment or accountability. We're talking a lot this morning about tests and assessments and standards. And higher ed doesn't have the same national standards that K-12 is talking about. But on the other hand, the Board of Regents is requiring all of our freshmen and seniors to be assessed. We participate in a national survey of student engagement every 3rd year. And so our students are somewhat bombarded, like your students are bombarded, because the legislature wants to know that the money they're putting in higher education, both dollars, is counting for something. And the third one is attainment. So we are now in higher education very much evaluated by our accrediting body, by our Board of Regents or our governing board on what percentage of our students we retain and what percentage of our students we graduate in 4 or 6 years. So the changes in higher ed have been substantial, and they're very consistent with the conversations that Douglas County and this school district is having about this program. And so they're profound. I teach a freshman seminar class in chemistry, and for those of you that don't know what a college chemistry book costs, it's about $180 to $200 for one book for one course, not counting lab. And I asked my students the other day what my freshman chemistry book cost, and I didn't tell them how many years ago, but they have a pretty good idea. $7.95. That's the impact on higher education and that college degree.
So I want to echo points that both of my colleagues have shared and try to bring it around one issue that I think many of you in the audience know already and act upon, but many of us in the education system are reluctant to admit. And that is quite simply that we are no longer the only act in town to educate your children. Many of you know that if you're not satisfied with your students' performance, there are places in strip malls that offer various methods to try to address a deficiency in math, a deficiency in English, etc. They'll charge you money for it, but you'll get results. Many of you know that if you're not happy with the test scores that your students are getting, you can go to other programs that help boost test scores, not by actually teaching them what they need to know, but by teaching them how to beat the tests. Many of our students know as well that if they're not satisfied with the education that they're getting in the classroom, there are millions of places online that they can go to access better lessons than the ones that their teachers are giving. And that's a fundamentally different reality, not just for our students in the classrooms, but for us as a society. It's changed the way society thinks about teachers, because we are now one among many, rather than the word that teacher used to represent, an honored member of the community who had access to resources that many others did not. right? We had a monopoly of information. There were 3 places to get those things 100 years ago: teachers, churches, synagogues, and mosques, or public libraries. That was the only place a kid could turn. And today, we have a surplus of information in society. There's more information than any of us could ever dream to master. In fact, most of the things that I traveled to Germany for to do my dissertation research on are now available on the web, which is a bummer because that was a great 6-month trip to Germany. But the simple fact is, if a student wanted to ask those same questions today that I wanted to ask back in the 1990s, they could find it all. It's there. And I'm not the expert that I would have been 25 years ago when I would have been the only one who had cracked those dusty tomes in the archives in Berlin, Munich, and Freiburg. So I think that's something that we have to accept. That's a significant change. And a book that I like, although colleagues may disagree on the panel, is by 2 professors at Stanford, John Seeley Brown, and I never remember the other fellow's name, but it's called A New Culture of Learning. And while I don't necessarily agree with a lot of their recommendations, I think we have to accept that fundamentally education and the learning environment now go beyond the 4 walls of the classroom, beyond the walls of this building. Your children come to our classroom not as blank slates, but as students who know more about some things than we do. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that the teachers are unprepared to teach. It means that the teachers need to think about what they're doing in the classroom to take advantage of the fact that your son knows more about robotics than I do. And your daughter knows more about music than I do. And if we can accept that transition and think about how we teach kids to learn rather than how we teach stuff, if we can get back to teaching kids rather than teaching stuff, I think we're going to be much more successful than if we keep trying to prepare kids by packing more stuff down their throats that they don't really need and that they can probably find without us. So as I think about what's changed, it's that we have to stop thinking about our schools as preparatory spaces. We cannot prepare kids for life when my children are online at age 2 or 3 on my iPad, encountering the world already. They're already experiencing life. We need to help them learn how to participate in life and prepare them in the process. We cannot prepare them for some date in the future, and they will not wait. If they don't like what they're getting, they will go somewhere else in the learning environment and get it from someone else. And if schools and teachers don't come to accept that, we will be out of work as fast as print journalism is disappearing because it refuses to accept that there are other ways to communicate the news than a newspaper.
Thanks, guys. I just want to add to the changing realities. About 25 years ago, I was a social studies teacher at Rampart High School, and I was on the textbook selection committee. Pretty thorough process. You had to go through a school board review and all that kind of stuff. We were selected a geography textbook, and I don't know if it was 6 months, but it was very shortly after that new textbook was sitting on the desk of the students, and they were looking at that textbook, that the Iron Curtain fell. That textbook hadn't even been hardly opened when it was irrelevant. And I guess the changing reality lesson from that is that students can get the information they need at a moment's notice, and we were relying on a textbook that within months after being purchased and put on the students' hands was irrelevant. In fact, I had to make up the unit on the Soviet Union, and I made pictures out of the newspaper and gave that to the students. That was the technology of my day, the copy machine. All right, so guys, thank you. And we'll continue now with some more introductions. So I'll let you, Michele, start with your introduction, and then we'll have a second question.
I think we owe them a round of applause first. Maybe.
All right.
Thank you.
My name is Michele Baldwin, and there are 3 things that you need to know about me. One is that I've had 6 different careers in my life. I started out as a vocal music director in a high school, and and then
Sorry, Stephanie.
the show goes on. And then I left teaching because I was dissatisfied with what I was doing. I felt like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I went into end user software training and database programming consulting, and I loved that. But at some point, I reached an end point, and there was no place to go further. So I left that and went into e-commerce project management, which I also loved. but there was still something that I kept finding missing. And a job opened up in a school district in Omaha, Nebraska, where I lived, and it was in the school district actually that I grew up in. And I was like, oh, this is great. And it was a technology education professional development coordinator. In other words, I taught teachers and classified staff members and administrators in our district how to use technology to help kids learn. Unfortunately, that then translated into let's learn how to use Microsoft Office and let's learn how to use the internet. And I kept feeling there was something more to this, and I really think that it can't just be about the tool, it has to be about the kid, and shouldn't the tool facilitate that? So I went back to teaching, and I taught elementary music, and I fell in love with the fact that I didn't have a lot of constraints on me. I could kind of do what I needed to do. And I had an inquiry-based model in my classroom. So yes, we were learning to play a xylophone, but we were playing African rhythms with some tubanos and some xylophones and some other percussion instruments. And the kids were learning about Uganda, and they were singing in Swahili. And the kids were like, wow, I didn't realize I could learn social studies and music. And wow, I didn't realize I could learn foreign language. And then we tied in some math, and they were just like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I loved what I was doing. And then it came down from our district that we needed to start standardized testing in music, and I said, I'm out. These kids are learning. I can tell you what they're learning. They can show you what they're learning. I am not going to put a piece of paper in their hands and make them score bubbles for, a quarter note equals this. So I quit my job, not having another job to go to. And then I'm going to tell you about my second piece that's important to me. I'm the mother of 4 children. They're all in their 20s now, and they are 4 distinctly unique learners. I received more of an education watching those children go to school and either succeed or struggle, and realizing, wow, these kids really learn differently, and there's not a school accommodating their needs. And how frustrating that was as a parent. And there were times when I said, you know what, just get through it. I don't care what grade you get in the class, just get through it. And as an educator saying that, that's something admitting to you that's very difficult, because we don't want to say that to kids. But at the point when I disagreed with what was happening in the class, I couldn't go in and tell the teacher, change the class for my kid. So I'm going to back up again. I quit my job as a music teacher. Children are all graduated from high school. Most of them are in college. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to be doing. And a friend of mine in Highlands Ranch, Colorado said, I think I'm going to start a school. And I said, really? What's it all about? She said, it's inquiry-based, it's multi-age classrooms, we're not going to do homework, we're not going to do grades, here's our philosophy, do you buy into this? And I'm like, yes, if it happens, I'm there. And she said, you would actually move to Colorado and leave your family behind to do this? And I said, absolutely, in a heartbeat. My husband said, yes, let's do it. She started the school, and here I am. And I can tell you as a teacher now, and a mother, and a human being, that I feel good for the first time in my life about what I am doing with other human beings. I have 8-year-olds that are saying the most profound things to me because they are allowed to think. And as a teacher, I want to teach the kids to learn. They have lots of content out there. They'll learn the content. I want to teach them to learn. So that's what you need to know about me and why I'm here, and I just didn't come for the free food.
So I'm Christie Lathrop, and I am actually a former Douglas County school teacher, and I taught at Mesa Middle School for 8 years. One of the primary reasons why I'm here is because I'm a parent of a toddler, and I live here in Castle Rock. And so, John, right now I need you to tell me I'm going to survive. Okay, awesome, thank you. And so I'm very invested in what's going on in our county. I'm very invested in us changing paradigms and in us improving education and making it meet the needs of the modern learner, because this is my reality. This is where my student will be going to school. My child will be going to school in the very near future, nearer than I like to admit. Another part of my reality is that, like I said, I was a classroom teacher for 8 years. I started off as a very traditional teacher. I was a science teacher. We did labs, we took tests, my students did notes. And at the end of the school year, we had wonderful relationships. I had wonderful relationships with my students, but after a couple years, I realized that the learning just seemed kind of empty. And it didn't really seem like the students were doing anything with their learning beyond taking the tests and doing whatever Mrs. Lathrop told them. And so I started to investigate new ways to be able to challenge my students and to empower them. And so one example of a student, a modern learner, becoming empowered in my classroom is a student named Cody. And Cody was the type of kid who was very charming. He had a whole lot of charisma, but he was the type of kid that was never really quite engaged in class. You know, he was the type of kid that would sit back during class discussion, and then he would raise his hand, and you would be really hopeful, oh, what is Cody gonna have to say? But Cody would say, can I go to the bathroom? And you'd be a little bit deflated. And so as I began to change the way things went in my classroom, one day, Cody came up to me and said, Mrs. Lathrop, you know what? I want to talk to you. And I'd say, no, you can't go to the bathroom right now, Cody. We're not going to do that right now. He'd say, Mrs. Lathrop, I want to talk to you. I want to let you know that I've been thinking really hard about what type of energy our county should be investing in. And I believe very strongly, and I talked this over with my parents, and I believe very strongly that we need to be investing in wind energy. And I can't tell you necessarily that that's what I believe personally, but I love that Cody came to that conclusion on his own, and he was able to rattle off all of the reasons why he felt that. And I was just shocked by how changing some of the ways that I was teaching my students empowered Cody to want to find better answers and to make decisions on his own. And so the modern learner wants to be empowered. And that's a big part of my focus, is on teaching teachers how to empower their students. And so since leaving the classroom, I've done a little bit of independent consulting. Primarily, I do some consulting with the Buck Institute for Education, along with Tim, where we focus on project-based learning. And we focus on providing teachers with the tools to be able to implement inquiry-based learning in their classroom, to be able to take those steps, to open up the classroom, to give the students more voice and choice, more empowerment, to foster more critical thinking. And so my biggest passion is providing teachers with tools.
Hi, my name is Gary Stager, and I've been working in education for the last 31 years as a teacher educator, as a journalist, as a speaker, as a consultant. I've worked in schools all over the world. In fact, I just returned from Australia a couple of days ago, so if you notice me yawning, that's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. I led professional development at the first 2 schools in the world where every kid had a laptop, and that was in 1990. The fact that we're still arguing about whether kids should have use of computers almost a quarter century later blows my mind and saddens me tremendously. I created one of the first online degree programs in the mid-90s. And my own doctoral research really frames a lot of my thinking about what's possible in rethinking education, in that we created an alternative learning environment inside a prison for teenagers in the state of Maine, where Amnesty International documented that children were being tortured. And we created a space where we put the artificial constraints of the curriculum, we put the needs and interests and talents and passions and inquiry and curiosity of the kids ahead of the arbitrary constraints of the curriculum. And in 3 years, didn't have a single kid who had to leave the classroom for discipline reasons. We had kids who hadn't been in school in several years, who had been labeled with every kind of learning disability under the sun, who would spend 3 months with us and go off to university. And it's really reminded me about the potential of students and how we really need to step up and create different opportunities to take advantage of the wondrous tools and technologies and knowledge that exist around us. I recently co-authored a book called Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom, which is on the surface about the kind of stuff like Rhesus Robot, about learning with technology, using technology as an intellectual laboratory and vehicle for self-expression. But more importantly, to build a bridge between this revolutionary movement that's happening outside of schools and schools that are completely unaware of it. There's this idea called the maker movement, where there are a couple million people tinkering with their kids or their neighbors or with their peers in their community outside of school, making things again, re-energizing craft traditions, but using digital technologies to supercharge them. So now you can have a sweatshirt with directional signals in the back that you've programmed and built the circuits by sewing with conductive thread, or embedding intelligence into a piece of paper or a small object that can be used to open the world to a kid that needs that. I'm going to be speaking this weekend at Maker Faire in New York City. There should be about 150,000 people there who are reveling in the idea of learning by doing, through firsthand experience, through making, through tinkering, through craft, through human expression. And I'm trying to bring those experiences into classrooms where they can really be amplified and be used in turn to amplify the potential of every kid. I put a number of ideas on the web, and the link to it is in the back channel, a number of principles that I'd like you to think about. But I want to focus on a few and then tell you a quick story about my own kids, since everyone's bragging about their children. The first principle is that things need not be as they seem. It sounds relatively simple, but school is a technology that was invented by folks fairly recently, and it has affordances and constraints, and it was created by man, and it can be changed and dismantled and replaced as well. I believe that young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity. Young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity, and it's incumbent upon us as parents and educators to build upon that capacity for intensity. Otherwise, it manifests itself as boredom or misbehavior or ennui, or perhaps worst of all, wasted potential. Bill Gates said he was fully formed as a programmer by 17. The years that kids spend at this great high school are when they become politicians and Olympians and poets and physicists and philosophers and mathematicians. I was talking earlier about the founding fathers were in their late teens, early 20s, except for Jefferson and Franklin. Martin Luther King led the Montgomery bus boycott at 24. Kids are competent, and classrooms need to be a great deal more intense, and that's very different from chaotic. They need to be more intense with a little less chaos. The best thing we can do as educators is to prepare kids to solve problems that the school has never anticipated. And from a policy perspective, we ought to base our work on the assumption that we wake up every morning and ask ourselves the question, how do I make this the best 7 hours of a kid's life? From there, all of the other questions about what we need to do in education really become theological ones. They become a matter of right and wrong, and of do we as a society, as a community, love our children. Now, I have 3 adult children, and my youngest, Yvonne, was the good student, was very popular, great with handicrafts and a lot of other things. She was good at pretty much everything. Didn't get great grades in high school. Her test scores were okay, but not amazing. She didn't take hardly any AP courses. We live in Southern California, where the only reason to take AP English is that's the one with books. So that was kind of the choice. You could be in English class with books or without books. But I point that out because she got into 7 of the best liberal arts colleges in America. And she was admitted because she was an interesting kid who had done interesting things inside and outside of school. And she settled on Bard College, which I'll come back to in a moment. Yvonne comes home from school in 10th grade and says, we're doing our schedule for next year. And I said, great, what do you want to take? And she said, art. I said, fabulous, it's terrific, you want to take art. So take art. She says, no, they won't let me. Why won't they let me? Because they say I should take math. Now, it was at this point that I pointed out to her that because we now teach algebra in utero, by the end of 10th grade, she had already satisfied the state requirements for high school mathematics. She'd already had like 5 math courses. And I knew her schedule would free up in subsequent years and she would be able to take more math. And I said, that's fine. They'll be mad at me. I said, I'll write a letter. They won't be mad at you. So I wrote a letter, dear guidance counselor, if there's any concerns, give me a call. Regrettably, the phone rings the next day. Hi, this is Yvonne's guidance counselor. I just wanted to let you know we received your letter and we think it's a really terrible idea for Yvonne to take art instead of math. I said, great, thanks for calling. She said, no, don't hang up. And we had a discussion about, their theory that if you didn't take math for a year, it would leak out. And I have a PhD in science math education. I don't subscribe to the leaks out theory. And they said, this is very unconventional, but I insisted I wanted my kid in art instead of math. She goes off to this fabulous liberal arts college where for 2 years you're actively discouraged from thinking about a major. You have to take courses in 8 different areas. She takes a whole bunch of humanities courses her first semester. She gets a report card. One of the professors wrote Enigma as a grade. She's like, that's it. I need to take some courses with numbers. So the next semester she takes calculus. She didn't take calculus in high school. She didn't take trig in high school. She walks into a class with a qualified calculus professor who begins the semester by saying, I love this class, I love this subject, I love that you're here, we're going to have a great time together, this is going to be fantastic. she got an A in university level calculus. And I am confident if she had taken it in high school, she would have never gone near the subject again, let alone learned it and loved it and understood the relevance of it and the beauty and application. And when I reminded her of this story, she turned to me and said, "Oh, you mean I turned out like you'd hoped?" And I'd like to stand in front of you and say that I had the foresight to know that this was the right decision 4 or 5 years earlier. I just wanted the kid to be happy and take art if that's what pleased her. At the end of 2 years, when she was asked to pick a major, kind of with a gun behind her head after she'd taken calculus and computer science and anthropology and studied with, National Book Award winning authors, she said art. And we're like, oh, jeez, where did that come from? Well, again, there's a happy ending. Of my 3 adult children, all with university degrees, the only one who's been employed every second since she's graduated and living on her own is the art major.
All right, so just to recap, we have, if I can get out from behind this. I know Stephanie's going to kill me because I dropped the microphone. Oh my gosh. So we have a practitioner, right, at a school that's doing some incredible things with students in a different sort of way. We have a former teacher and now a consultant, and we have an internationally known author here to join us this evening, and you guys get to answer this question. So, based on these changing realities that they talked about and other changing realities that you can probably think about as well, if you had to reinvent schools based on these changing realities, where would you start?
I'll start, and I feel like I've already been a part of it, so maybe I'm cheating a little bit. When my friend Kelly Tankley and Matthew Anderson started Anastasis Academy, which is now in Centennial, Colorado, we all came in as staff with a leap of faith that this was all going to work. And we'd had nothing to go from because there really wasn't anything that looked like what we were planning to do. And they said, you're not going to have a set curriculum. You're not going to have any textbooks, and we all cheered, which they were happy about. But they also said, you're helping us to build a culture. And it's not, we talked about breaking everything and starting over, and we noticed that meant beso, which in Spanish is a kiss. So I don't know if that means anything, but I felt like I was a part of something from the beginning that was going to truly change how we approach learning. And as I look at the school and I think that our focus is on where the kids are driving their learning, it's rather interesting that we have for years said if kids don't learn X, Y, and Z, they'll never be able to do other things. And what we do is we start the kids doing things, and oh, by the way, they're learning X, Y, Z, and a few other letters along the way as well. We're not tricking them into learning anything. A lot of times when we'll start with a statement, the kids are asking questions about that. They devise projects. We're very much into service learning. So if I started a school, it would look very much like the school that I'm teaching in. And I know that's because of the bias that I already have in being a part of that. But I think that emphasis on the ownership of the children in their own learning, and we're talking preschool-aged kids up through grade 9. And if people will say, oh, preschool kids, they can't do anything, that's inquiry-based, and they totally can. 8, 9, and 10-year-olds are doing things and having discussions that I didn't have until university, and I thought I was pretty smart. They're having these discussions because they can. And a lot of times, we talk about, we give our children a lot of freedom, and that scares a lot of people, and it even scares their parents. Their parents took the leap of faith as well. But what we've told the kids, and we've shared with the parents too, is that children are capable of so much more than we think they are. And when we give them the opportunity, we give them the freedom and the chance to learn how to manage that freedom, they end up having natural consequences when they misuse their freedom. We don't have to assign those to them. But they've learned that along with that freedom in their learning becomes a lot of responsibility. I don't have to teach the kids responsibility through giving them a homework packet at the end of the day. They're responsible for their own learning, and that weighs very heavily on them, but in a very powerful way. So when you look at what's happening, what you're looking at trying to implement, I would say that the biggest thing that you can do is challenge your students to rise to that occasion. They're your children, you know what they're capable of, and they will surprise you and please you in ways that you've never imagined. I feel like the learners that have the most struggles in a traditional system thrive in an area where they have more choice and more voice in what they're able to do. And when they're, doing a project where they're helping people at the Gathering Place downtown Denver sell some of their art for some profits to help people who are living in homeless shelters, and you have a 7-year-old child saying, I helped do all of this, plus I figured out all this change, and there's all this math involved in writing and video making, that's extremely powerful. So a school that you want to design for the learner for today has to be about the learner. It can't be about the content. It can't be about, we have to make sure that they know all of these facts or else they'll never survive, because they will. They'll learn if you give them the opportunity to learn.
Well, I think that a great example of how we need to reform and how we need to change is actually kind of what's taking place here. Where Castleview High School is being intentional. I think that that's always the biggest key, is being intentional in everything that you're doing. And so they're trying to be intentional and having this conversation and inviting you to share in the vision, and then eventually inviting you to share some of the thoughts that you have about regarding what are the outcomes that we want. What is it that we want from our students? From that point, you can continue to be intentional in your conversations as you plan to allow these things to happen. We want our students to be empowered. We want them to be tenacious. We want them to have empathy. And those things don't necessarily happen naturally. We have to think very carefully and be very intentional in the experiences that we provide to our students to foster the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we want for our students to have, that we identified in our outcomes by the time they leave Castleview High School, or by the time they graduate college, or by the time they're parents, or by the time, so on and so forth. Which brings me to my next point, which is that we have to recognize that this is a cycle, and that learning is a cycle, and we have to embrace the idea that our students should be lifelong learners, and we need to find ways to be able to instill that desire in them, to make them want to continue to seek the truth and to continue to seek answers, and then use those in their own lives, not just to know it for just the purpose of being able to answer something trivial, but being able to actually make decisions and make things better.
So I believe that knowledge is a consequence of experience. And what's exciting about the technologies and energy of the maker movement is that learners are able to be engaged in real experiences, like the kids had said earlier. And the real challenge for education is that in a time when the laser printer the laser cutter, or 3D printer are as likely to be found in the physics lab as the art studio, as the auto shop, we're not only blurring the artificial boundaries between subject areas, these kids are covering a lot of curricular objectives across disciplines. We're dissolving the distinctions between what we consider art and science and technology and engineering and mathematics and language arts, but we're completely obliterating the artificial distinction between vocational and academic education. We're creating a context in which, as parents, as citizens, as educators, as a school community, we no longer have to sort kids into winners and losers. We no longer have to decide at 7th grade which kids are going to be plumbers and which kids are going to be neurosurgeons. That we can prepare all kids to be able to make informed decisions for how they can lead productive lives and become empowered citizens who participate in their community and make the world a better place. And I'm not Nostradamus, but I will make one prediction. In the very near future, schools will not enjoy the monopoly they currently hold on children's time, meaning they won't go to school as much as they do now. And the way that I know that I'm 110% right about that is every politician on earth says the exact opposite, right? that the school day will be longer, the school year will be longer, we need to make everything tougher and more miserable. How many of you work from home at least part of the week? Show of hands. Right. So when we were in agrarian society, your kids stayed home with you. When you went off to factories, the kids went off to factory schools. It's not going to take long before it occurs to you that maybe you don't have to get your kids up at 5 o'clock in the morning and schlep them somewhere every day. That maybe they could be learning more at home, maybe they could be doing things in the community, maybe other kinds of opportunities will emerge. And then the challenge for schools like this is how to remain viable. Because schools like this are in fact a technology. The 25 little desks, one big desk, the bells, the spelling books, the tests. And I think the things that make school viable in the future are the reasons why we need to be co-located at the same time in the same physical space. And ironically, those are the very things that are being hit first by budget cuts and devalued by the society. Band, drama, science labs, field trips, authentic experiences that can't be done online, that can't be read out of a book, that can't be accomplished at Kumon or a gymnastics studio. And as educators, you really need to think about what it is that school is about and how it's going to be viable in the future. You know, friends of mine talk about every 20 years, I'm on a panel about what's going to happen in 20 years, and they say, well, everything will be exactly the same in school. And I predict that 20 years from now, everything in school will be exactly the same, except the kids might not show up anymore. Unless you undertake the hard work that the terrific educators here in Castleview are undertaking.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. I don't want to be part of that. In 20 years, I want to make a difference. And the teachers in this building want to make a difference, just as a sidelight. Thank you again. So, Doug, you want to start the next introductions. And I do want to share with you, Doug is the one that came up with the video production analogy. I want to give credit where credit is due. So I stole that from you. All right. So go ahead, Doug. Do you guys' introductions.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Douglas Herman, and I'm the proud father of 21 college freshmen. I know. No, actually, I don't have any children, but I feel as if over the course of the last 10 years of teaching students and kids media arts that I have about 1,000 children, and it's a really rewarding process, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But I'm actually here to represent the amazing staff and community and students of Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. But to get to Science Leadership Academy, which was started in 2006, does anyone know who Science Leadership Academy is? Has anyone ever heard of it before? A lot of people think it's a charter school, but in fact it's a public school, and I think that's really important because in 2006 that community was in a very similar position to what Castleview is now. The idea of how are we going to modernize what we're doing to ensure our students are having meaningful interactions with adults and then with their peers and with their communities. And I want to take it, before we talk about what SLA is and why it's a successful school and how Castleview can model some of what we do, it's a much smaller place. It's not a comprehensive high school as yours is. Yours is about three sizes of SLA. But I want to go back to the beginning. I hated high school. How many of you, raise your hands, hated high school? How many of you hated history class? I hated history class, and I am now a certified history teacher. And I love teaching history, and I think the reason why I love teaching it is because I'm teaching it in a way that I was never taught it. And this coming year at SLA, I'm actually not going to get the opportunity to teach history, and I'm really sad about that. I'm excited about the opportunity to teach all media arts through the course of this academic year and to continue to push this program that we piloted in 2009. But the idea of not having the opportunity to help students wrestle with the ideas and the situations of the world that they're living in now is a little sad for me. So I think my media classes are going to be pretty documentary heavy, and we're going to be talking about Syria anyway, and they're going to be like, what does that have to do with photography? And I'm like, going to prove that there's a reason. But I took a kind of like a backdoor into education because I did not like it when I was a kid, and I spent a whole lot of time ignoring science and math because the teachers I had made me dislike those subjects. And then history too, so I don't know what I really like. Maybe English, maybe my English teacher was the only one that I really liked, and I love Shakespeare, and I love to write, and at one point or another, after I had a finance degree, I decided I don't like this either, and Wall Street seems a little too much like becoming a shark, and yeah, hell maybe is a good example. And I didn't like the environment I was in, so I decided to quit that. And I think it's important to understand the idea that your students and yourselves are going to continue to reinvent who they are. And the only way that they're going to be able to do that successfully is if they learn how to do that through the environments that they put themselves in terms of education. And this is the beginning of that process. I had to leave America to never return in 2001 to start to figure out why I needed to live in America for the rest of my life. And I'm a little sad about that because I really love living elsewhere, but coming back to the United States after traveling all over the world, I've been to about 43 countries to date, and I'm so about 25% of my way towards my goal of seeing every country in the world before I die, is opened up my eyes and my mind to what the world is really like, and how I wasn't introduced to that when I was younger, and how I had never left the country. I hadn't even left the state until the time I was 18. And then I found myself in second year of college, I found myself in Amsterdam and in Italy and in China, and it radicalized everything that I was thinking about life. So in 2001, I quit everything, and I went to Asia to never return. And it was glorious. All I did was bounce around. I think I created a website, or no, my email passcode, don't remember this, was Vagabond, because all I really wanted to do was bounce around the globe and backpack and do that horrible thing that parents are like, oh my God, my kid wants to travel. And I loved it, and it was contagious. And I went out with the idea of wanting to write about the world. And I wanted to write that great American novel, which obviously was never written by me, and because otherwise I wouldn't be here doing this. But and then one day I realized that I did not have the capacity to communicate what I was experiencing through words alone, and I started cheating, and I picked up a camera. And I took these images and came home and was blown away by the content and the composition and the memories that I had that were connected to these images, but I didn't like what they looked like. The exposure was really horrible, and the lighting was bad, and I realized that a lot of the images that I took were actually just my memory, and they weren't actually on the film. So I decided to, get my money together and buy a good camera, and then go back out there. And I taught myself photography on the fly, on the road, and came home with 350 rolls of film. Worried that if I brought it to a lab somewhere in another part of the world that it would not actually work, because I brought one roll in and they destroyed it. They scratched all of the images, and so I brought them all home with the hope that I was going to become this great photographer. And having not ever seen any of the images, but I believed that what was on those rolls of film were groundbreaking, and I was the next Avedon or whatever. And so I looked at these images, and I was pleasantly surprised at what I saw, and started pursuing a career as a photographer. And then I got an opportunity to teach photography after a year of learning how to work in the darkroom and do stuff with Photoshop. And then that was the death knell for me, because I got to work with kids, and I've never been able to turn away from it ever since. And now all I do is work with kids and help them understand how to start connecting to their passions and communicating how they feel about the world they live in and the communities they traverse, and inspiring them, and not just engaging them, but empowering them to make changes in the world that they live in, to believe that not just through a change.org petition, that they could actually enact change in their community, and they can see something that's wrong with the world, and they can do something about it. And that's a really important skill, whether you're going to do that through image or through words or through volunteerism. It's important that we put our children in a position to feel confident that they can actually do something that matters, even if it's just themselves. This is at the crux of what I do. And now working at SLA is a dream. We have 500 students where basically we follow the scientific method in all of our course subjects. We're inquiring, we're researching, we're collaborating, we're presenting, and we're reflecting all the time. Our students are not tested on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. They just make stuff, and they make the most amazing things. and then they still outperform all the other students who have been practiced and taught for the test and go through the process of the standardization of education in these larger schools, and our students are still outperforming them, and now they're all going to these great colleges. So a lot of these students, they actually are now coming back, and it's bittersweet when they come back and they tell us, why did I go to college? Because they feel that they've lost access, they've lost instruction, they've lost motivation, they've lost caring adults who are a part of their world, who are there to help them figure out who they are, and they wish that they would have just stayed in high school. How many of you feel that way? See, this is what we're talking about. I mean, these students are now coming back to their community to ensure that the next wave of students have that level of support. And I had to do something along the way that was really dangerous. I had to basically relinquish control of my classroom as a history teacher and as a media artist, as a media teacher for photography and video production. And the first thing my students wanted to do was make a zombie movie, of course, right? And then I was also like, awesome, let's do it. So we wrote a script for a zombie film, and we started to put it together. And then I basically alienated myself in the first year from all of my colleagues because we were shooting a live zombie film in the hallway of a high school while they're trying to teach Spanish. And everyone's like, what the hell is going on in the hallway? Oh my God, this is ridiculous. But what the students did was they didn't just make some sort of slashy, gore, crazy, oh, we're gonna have zombies kill people. They started making social commentary, and the cause of the zombification of our city of Philadelphia were the food that the students are given to eat every day. And this, the general plot is, well, maybe the story is a group of documentary film students are getting ready to document an education conference about progressive education in their school. It's very meta. And they, in the process of this, a gentleman named Will Richardson, who you might have heard of, he's an educational theorist, and he wrote a book called Why School. He comes to be the keynote speaker at our education conference called EduCon. And in the process of that, he eats a sandwich and then starts to have what seems like an epileptic seizure, falls on the ground, everyone freaks out. Turns out that he actually started to turn into a zombie. And all these documentary film students have been looking at these cameras they've been setting up in all the rooms to get ready to document the conference the next day, and they're witnessing cell by cell, room by room, the same thing happening all over the place. Quickly, the entire community is overrun, everyone's a zombie, and everything's crazy. And then we cut to a montage with some Bruce Springsteen, and then we come back, and then all of a sudden we're following a survivor. But then the survivor eats another survivor, and we realize that our story is being told through the perspective of a zombie. My staff loved me because this was happening all in amongst all of the classes that they're trying to run. But at the end of the day, these students wrote a script, started to film it, and were already thinking about how they were going to promote this to get it signed. Now, while that didn't happen, and we can consider them failures in their mission to make a film, all of them are in film school right now. And all of them are making films now. And we now have a nonprofit that's coming out of the classroom and a consulting company that's coming out of the classroom. And the students are the ones that are running the show, and I'm just coaching from the side.
Good evening. My name is Ron Tsur, and I'm a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, under John. My work is in mathematics education. I work with math teachers, do research in math. But the major reason I'm here is sitting here in the fourth row, right near the students and the robotics, where one of my past students still is, always, students are always my students for life, Mr. Vince Parenti, who said, well, there's something really interesting. You're going to be excited about it. Why don't you come and join what's going on in Castle View? And I said, when my students call, I go. That's the reason I'm here. I'm going to go a little bit to what I'm bringing to the table beyond the expertise in math and in math education and learning, which I'm probably going to hint a little bit, and that will be it. I'll say only two things about my own children, or one about all of them. They come back at 3 o'clock, take a nap for about an hour, wake themselves up and work until 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on homework, and I had nothing to say about it. It goes back to some of the conversation that was earlier. If there's anything in my view that is the new learning and the new school and the new education and new everything, is that kids have to have responsibility for their learning. That's the number one value I would put on everything. The other thing that I would put with it is that I was in China in 2009 working with teachers, math teachers over there, to find out more about how they teach. They're considered the world champions. I know that Dr. Jara is going to talk about that. But we were trying to really understand what is it they do in class that can be looked upon from the point of view of some math theory and understanding how the learning takes place. And they have 50 kids or more in the classroom, and they know where each and every student is. And when they start their class, they start it with something they call bridging. This is a translation. And the entire idea is that you don't do warm-ups, and you don't do homework problems for 25 out of the 40 minutes that you have for class. You give them new problems to solve things that they already know how to solve, so they can reactivate the knowledge they have. And when we asked those teachers to explain what they were doing, they said, well, it's obvious. If kids need to learn something new, you need to activate what they do. And the reason I share this story is because I needed to go all the way to China to realize what I've been doing for my entire life. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about where I come from, because it's not just about math ed. It's more about life. We talked about this earlier in the afternoon, and my work, most of my life, has been with adolescents. That's the time that our kids develop their identities and who they want to be and how they're going to be like it, and they struggle with it mightily. And we need to help them in doing that. And the academic programs we provide for them should somehow fit into that larger context and process. And where did I learn it? I was born, grew up in a kibbutz in Israel. So English is not my native language, Hebrew is. And kibbutz, to those who do not know, raise your hand if you have ever heard about it. Okay, so it's a community in Israel, about 200, 300, 500, sometimes 900. My kibbutz is pretty large. Community where you live together. And the interesting thing, when I heard from Jim and from Vince and from others about what is happening in Castle View, that's a whole deja vu for me. I grew up in a system when I was a child, and actually my father grew up in that system, where my father learned math, science, and some history and English, building kites with his science teacher. That was his project because he loved kites. When I was in high school, it was a little different. I started working with kids when I was 12-year-old. Without talking about how many years, that's a lot of years in education. My entire life has been in education. I've been a teacher, and I'm still a teacher. Every week, to keep my sanity and to really know that we're doing what is needed, I go in the Denver public schools, to one of the elementary schools, and I work with the kids and I work with the teachers. Because I need it. That's how I lived my life. And then in a high school, we were working with one another. And then I became a teacher. One of my deviations was to be part of a group that built a new kibbutz, kind of being a pioneer within the pioneer system. And I came back and I wanted to be in education and got my degree. Went to have a master's in the Technion, which is like the MIT in Israel, and went to the University of Georgia in Athens for my PhD in math education. And I want to count, I can go on and things that I do and work we do about a project we got from National Science Foundation for developing new software for kids with learning disability in 3rd and 4th grade. Or with AP calculus students and doing something in programming and parallel programming. I can talk about a lot of things that I do, but I actually would like to culminate this presentation of where I come from with 2 things. Number one, the kids I really think about, beside my personal, are those 1,000 teachers that I probably worked with. Math teachers mostly, but not just, also science, and what they do with their students, and the students I worked with. And thing that I think what I was trying to do with all these people is to say, you need to go out and make a difference in my case, it's the mathematical lives of your students. And it's basically what Garrett was saying. You know, you go there for every day for 7 hours, and you need to make it. They need to learn. They need to be about learning, and that's going back to what the Chinese teacher said to me. It's not about student-centered. It's not about curriculum. It's not about standards. It's not about teacher-centered. What we do here is learning-centered. And that was a lesson I learned, the way they were talking about. What you need to do is to make sure that every one of us, the teachers, the principals, the kids, the parents, are set to learn any point in their time. So here's the question for everybody. I don't know, I could answer it. When I was a child in high school in the kibbutz, if anyone said that that child in a school where there are no grades, and you work with subjects and with problem-based, and you go in at 4 o'clock to milk the goats, and that child, without having the matrit, which in Israel is pretty important, would eventually become a professor of math education in the last 4 years, delving into a domain that he never ever thought about, or anyone could predict that he would actually be connected, which is doing brain studies with fMRI. When I was in high school, there was not even MRI. There was not even CT. Maybe there was EEG. So what I'm trying to suggest is that I come from a system that seems to be pretty similar to what Castleview is trying to do. And it is a system that allows people to take responsibility and forge forward in ways that nobody can predict, which is exactly not just where the future is, but actually the present.
Good. I hope you're still awake. I'm amazed. So thank you for staying awake. It's very hard, you know. You're very well educated parents. Thank you, and some students too. I see some those kids still there. And Rob, you have very good children there. That's good. Keep them awake, please. I have to tell you, as the only Chinese up here, it's a good time to be Chinese nowadays. So. If you haven't tried, you should give it a try. It's nice, because everybody thinks you've got the right education. But that's a lot of pressure to have to tell. The reason I'm here is that it comes from a story that's June 15th. This last June 15th, I flew back from Perth, Australia, directly to Chicago. We had dinner. My son graduated, so he just got his degree from University of Chicago. He had dinner. He said, "Dad, I'm very worried." We did not celebrate because I told him, "You've just spent enough money and you've just done what other people told you. So it's nothing worth celebration. So just if that's it, that's it." So we sat there. He said, "Dad, I'm very worried." I said, "Why?" "Because we're going back to China." He said, "How are you going to explain to your friends that I majored in art history? You know, no Chinese should major in that. It's supposed to be." The issue is, the whole thing is that, because in the Chinese, he said, if you major in art, that means you're no good at math. And math is a qualifying exam for being a Chinese citizen. That's if you're not good at math, you can't be Chinese. No. So I tried to explain to him. I said, "Son, no worry about this. I am a failed peasant. I grew up in a village in China. In a village, I was going to be a peasant. My father knew I was not going to be a good peasant. He sent me to school. So that's why I'm a bad peasant. I'm actually, so I left, you know, over those things. But I said, as long as you're going to stay out of my basement, you can do whatever you like." So that's my conversation with him. And he has stayed out of my basement. And that's actually why I do this. I grew up in China. I taught in Chinese universities, schools. I've been in the U.S. for about 20-some years. I've been doing education research in different places. I've taught at Hamilton College, Colgate University, Linfield College, Willamette, Michigan State University, now I'm at the University of Oregon. So I've done a lot of this research. I've written a lot of articles, hundreds of articles, and 20-some books. But what really hit me is the idea about what keeps our children out of our basement. That's I think ultimately, Jim, whatever castle view you're trying to create, it has to fulfill the mission of keeping your kids out of your basement. Now, that may be math, may not be math. So what we need to know, I have two things from all my life. I spent a lot of time in other countries, right? Just I'm from like Gary, I travel, I've flown 300,000 miles this year already. So just think about this thing. What I've understood from Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and US, any country systems, in education, we always think children should know everything. And that's why you're good A in math, and that's what we call the GPA thing. It's one of the silliest ideas you can imagine. You are allowed to be bad in something. We reserve perfection to someone we call God. You're not. So you have to be bad at something. So as a Chinese, I choose to be bad at math. And so just to defy the whole thing. So now I'm here. The only reason I learned English because I was bad at math. Seriously, some real stories. So all my life, I'm running away from my failure, but discover what I can do. I think schools, education, what you're trying to do is to help children to learn, discover, like you were saying, identity, where you want to be. That's the first thing. If you're extremely bad at something, you must be good at something. So just remember, if you don't know yet, just haven't discovered, schools are supposed to help people discover what they might be good at. The second thing I've learned, thank you, the second thing I've learned is that if Lady Gaga is useful, anyone can be useful. That is, when you were talking about how reality has changed, how has reality changed? In my village, all the talents, the knowledge that's useful has to do with producing food, making food. In this country, most talents and knowledge that involves food has nothing to do with making food, but convincing you where you should eat. Do you notice that? All the food commercials, all the restaurants. In fact, in this country, the more money you spend, the less food you get. What's the point? You're buying the psychological experience. So that's why Lady Gaga is useful. We're consuming different products. So it's not only science, it's what kind of science. It's not only engineering, it's what kind of engineering. So I can tell you that we have to value every talent in school. No matter what talent you have, seriously, Honey Boo Boo is useful nowadays. She's not in her parents' basement. You look at that. So you have to value that. So two things. Help each individual discover what they're good at and value whatever they're good at and pursue that. Trust me, they will be out of a basement, and my son actually is out of a basement. By the way, Oregon's houses don't have basements. Anyway, that's why I moved to Oregon. So that's just a reason. So let's go. Thank you.
All right. Well done. Dr. Zhao, author of 2 books, Catch Up or Lead the Way, and World Class Learners. I don't think you mentioned that. Okay. One of the leading theorists in the country, internationally as well. He flies all over the place, all over the globe. Another practitioner at higher ed, and a practitioner at a school that's one of the leading high schools in the nation in doing things differently. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. What role does innovation and entrepreneurship play in the future of education? And we got about 10 minutes.
Thanks. That's excellent. I forgot to mention before we touched that question that the zombie film was called No Child Left Behind. And the interesting thing now to tie this back to the question is that we're now going into year 5 of this media program with an explicit concentration in video production. And I think we've graduated over 500 media artists from this one tiny little high school, which has 500 a year. We started with 6 students. Those 6 students who were really interested in making this film, who are all now in media art degrees. They're about to graduate this year. They ran around the school creating havoc for 1 year with these cameras and doing what we all fear happens when you give teenagers cameras. And I've gotten better at figuring out how to stop that from happening on a daily basis. But because of those 6 students running around and everyone else in the culture seeing this, 27 students took that full-time class the next year, and another 36 the year after that. And now I have 237 students for this academic year. And it's not that these students are the 21 proud, I'm the dad of 21 college freshmen. That's from our advisory, which you have an advisory here as well, and it's extremely important. It's the most important role that I play at the school. 15% of those students are pursuing film. All of them took my classes. The other ones are pursuing other things, and they just have a diversified skill set. And a lot of them are pursuing entrepreneurial pursuits. So I mentioned that we built some things out of the classroom. And it started with those 6 students who were really interested in making this film. And we had an EDUCON conference, and after the first night of one of the evenings, we were at a restaurant and we were talking, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, do you know anyone you're from New York? Do you know anyone in New York who can do a video production? We're doing a TEDx talk, and we'd like to know if you have anyone you can steer us towards." And he started telling me he had a $50,000 budget, and I said, "Well, we can do it for half of that." And I had no idea how we were going to do that. And he said, "Really? Okay, cool. How is that going to happen?" And so I immediately thought on the fly of the Rough Cut Productions team that these 6 students made as the film company that was going to make the zombie movie. And I was like, well, we have this thing called Rough Cut Productions, and we shoot live streamable media, and we can do anything you want. You just let us know what it is, and we can, cater to your needs. And he's like, okay, let's do it. Within a week, we were now hired to do something we had never done before. So about a week after that, I'm driving up the New Jersey Turnpike in a rented Tahoe with $500,000 worth of video equipment and 6 teenagers, and petrified that we just made a huge mistake. We get to this place, we set up, we end up killing this thing. It's amazing. And I remember overhearing a guest at the event talking to someone in Amsterdam, and I hear the phone conversation from the other side, and the guy said, this is one of the best TED Talks I've ever seen. And then the guy who I'm standing next to says, yeah, and the coolest thing about it is that a bunch of 15-year-olds are the ones who were doing the stream. And he said, the guy in Amsterdam says, what? And then he clarifies what the whole entire scenario looked like. And that was the beginning of something really profound. We now have a nonprofit that exists. It's in response to the fact that a lot of these students, as they go to the university level, recognize the fact that they've lost access, lost instruction, lost opportunity, and they recognize that even if they want to pursue film as a career, the university level is not providing them with what they need so that they could have a portfolio that would provide them with a job when they finish the university. So they're shifting shifting gears. So we created this nonprofit so that they could have an opportunity to continue to pursue their dreams. And we now we're trying to create this year a citywide program for Philadelphia where students, not just at SLA, but at other schools that will never, underneath this austerity process, ever have a video production program because it costs a lot of money to pull it off. Now they have an opportunity to do the same kind of a thing. And we're a fishbowl school, so lots of people come to our school to check us out and to see what's going on, and a lot of those educators come into our video program and they see it and they're blown away by what these students are doing, and they're doing what all of these students over here are doing, and I applaud you for being involved in this process as well. And they want to do the same thing. So now our students are teaching students and teachers in India online, and wrap your head around that. 15-year-olds are teaching teachers how to teach teenagers media production in another country. That's where we're going. That's where we need to go. That's what's happening whether we like it or not. And we need to figure out ways to empower these students to have an opportunity to follow these opportunities. there are chances for them to do really profound work that they might not do that 10 years from now, as I think all attest to the fact that we keep changing. And I said earlier today that I reinvent myself every 3 to 5 years, and it's true. I know that 5 years from now I'll be doing this in some capacity, but the coolest thing about it is when these students start to change what they're doing and how what they did during these years, these formative years, are going to influence their communities in really profound ways.
So I'll try to take it from a very different lens, building exactly from where you stopped, Doug, and where the people who built this robot, the teachers and the students, are coming from. The innovation and entrepreneurial is a way of thinking that drives right into the heart of a theory of learning that I am trying to use myself and work with teachers to understand so they can engage their students. We now know about the brain, and that theory of learning has been around for quite some time, probably from the German movement and definitely from Dewey. Everything that we do and the brain can actually learn is goal-directed. The brain runs activities that are goal-directed. The goals are monitoring what the brain is doing, and that's what's going on. So if you go to entrepreneurial and innovation and you want to do creative stuff and you engage kids in doing that, this is a good example. The goal was to serve a purpose of a child who has some needs. So on the top of everything else, these kids are learning how to care for someone else, which in my mind is as important as the robot. And then there is a goal, and probably you failed about 20,000 times before something did work and so on. And that's the process of learning. So from my perspective, the notion of entrepreneurship and innovation is all about creating context for the students to set goals, then work to accomplish them, and in the process they learn.
Well, I think it's very simple. It's basically there are no jobs. The Chinese have taken all your jobs away. So that's the problem. It's just well, that's the Republican version, and well, that's Democrat version actually. By the way, the Republican version is that we should send to the Chinese anyway, But the Chinese actually are lamenting the fact that the Vietnamese taking their jobs away. So to forget about that. There's another version of it. But it is factual. 53 of college graduates in the U.S. don't have full-time jobs. Only 53% actually of the whole workforce are employed full-time. It's the basic disappearance of jobs. Over the last 30 years, the rich have got richer, poor get poorer. And so you can blame Obama. Get on the the website, thanksobama.com. Do you know that website? Yeah, if you spill your coffee in the morning, you make a click. Thanks Obama. It's just spill my coffee. Or you can blame, Bush. In Douglas County, you can choose either one. Doesn't matter. The real reason is simply true that automation and outsourcing have taken all the jobs that require routine skills. Our schools today are still preparing people to take those routine jobs. I spent 15 years in Michigan. I saw those coming, but nobody believed it. People thought the auto age would go on forever. We don't want to admit it. No one wants to invent new. Everyone wants to keep the same. People didn't realize, like I said, the Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stones. Things change. Things change really fast. So that's the fact. So what do we need? Entrepreneurs and innovators and creators used to be accidental. We just let them be, like the Gates, like Zuckerberg, and those kind of crazy people. They're there. We let them be. Today, they have to be our school's opportunity. Creativity, entrepreneurship used to be something nice to have. It becomes a necessity. America's future, this gap, the rich, the creative, the rich people, because we have rendered the lower people trying to be employed. We have a bipolar growth in this economy. The creative people, think about Zuckerberg, this kind of sociopath who created something, kind of social I don't know, just a crazy guy, Zuckerberg. Imagine him. He did not even have friends in middle school. So he created a company, $100 billion company, based on wasting people's time. That's the thing about the face. Now, that's crazy, but he's making a lot of money. So now, Twitter is going to go on this. So there's a creative people making a lot of money, but what they don't do, they don't create jobs. Facebook is $100 billion company, employs about 6,000 people. So you, each one of you, your children, have to be a creator, because that sector is growing fast. Another sector in the U.S. is growing fast. It's the people who bring Zuckerberg his coffee. That's the service sector. That's growing, but that doesn't need education. So I think, Jim, the challenge for all of us to make sure our kids will stay out of our basement is relies on how well we educate our future generation in cultivating their creativity, unique talent, and entrepreneur thinking. And I think what you're trying to create is to do precisely that. And all of that involves, are you guys, you're Matt, right? One of you is called Matt. Yes, you're Matt. You're a cool guy. Okay. The other two are cool too. Okay. But anyway, so you said something about risk. Risk taking is one of the most important spirit we will need in the future. But that's often educated out by good schools. That's horrible. Thank you.
Great job. And thank you so much for joining us tonight and being with us for the past 2 days. Really appreciate your support and your guidance. I want to ask you a question, a what-if question. What if I can guarantee that your son or daughter will be successful in what they're talking about? That they would walk out, if they graduate at Red Rocks, and not in the rain, and they graduate from Red Rocks and they're prepared for the future. I'm just going to read you some things. I've been taking notes. Real experiences, student interest, purposeful education, reinventing themselves, a meaningful and complex education where students are engaged at high levels and they're empowered and it's personalized, where they pursue their passion. They're lifelong learners. Education outside the walls of this building, another thing that I heard. I want to tell you that my passion is to try to make this happen. The challenge, though, is to get you to participate with me and with the staff members that have the same passion in this room, that are sitting right here, and some that aren't sitting right here. Because the hurdle is our traditional mindset. Because we went to school, I went to school in a more traditional environment for a different day. A day that's long gone. So you got to believe in that there's got to be something new and different that's going to make that happen for your son or daughter. Now, I looked at the back channel questions, and there was a couple that were reoccurring in there, and it's this concept of how did my kid get into college? Well, I'm telling you, there are kids getting into elite colleges. There are kids getting into junior colleges. There are kids that are getting into all sorts of things that haven't come from a traditional education. That's not a requirement. We will work on that, and we will inform you on how that happens. And because of a lack of time tonight, I know you're all tired. It's been a long day. These guys have been working 16 hours, right, Gary? And 16 hours. We will address that. We're not leaving that out of the equation. We want to prepare students to be ready for the future. If college is part of their future, we're getting them ready for it. So again, as I stated at the beginning, we've got a big task in front of us. We need your help. We need you to be partners in what we're doing. And I want you to continue to come to these informational meetings as we publicize them, we get the dates out. Come and have a dialogue with us. If you're interested in getting more involved in it, let me know, send me an email, and I'll try to get you involved in some way, shape, or form. We're going to create a school here that prepares students for the future. I guarantee it. Thank you for coming tonight.